Before the Mount Washington began its long reign on the waters of Lake Winnipesaukee, the lake was dominated by the Lady of the Lake. There were steamboats on the lake before the Lady was built in 1849. The first had been the Belknap, launched in 1833. But no steamboat had offered regular passenger service on the big lake after the Belknap was wrecked on Steamboat Island in 1841. The impetus for building the Lady of the Lake was the coming of the railroad. The Boston, Concord, and Montreal Railroad, chartered in 1844, was planned to run north from Concord through the Lakes region and up the Baker River Valley to Haverhill and Vermont. The railroad was opened to Laconia and Lake Village, now Lakeport, in 1848, and to Meredith and Holderness, now Ashland, in 1849. The prospect of the railroad and the many potential customers it would bring to Lake Winnipesaukee inspired a small group of entrepreneurs to build a large passenger steamboat. The effort began in 1848 when William Walker, Jr. of Concord came to Lake Village to meet Benjamin J. Cole, the president of Cole, Davis & Company, later the Cole Manufacturing Company. The result of their discussions was the formation of a steamboat company. In June of 1848, the state legislature chartered the Winnipesaukee Steamboat Company with 6 incorporators, including Cole and Walker. The company was authorized to issue stock of up to $50,000 for buying real estate, building wharves, warehouses, and other buildings, and of course, constructing and using steamboats, steam vessels, and towboats on the waters of the said Winnipesaukee Lake. The capital was largely provided by local investors. The first meeting of the corporation was held in Laconia on September 12, 1848. Cole was elected president and Walker the agent. At an October 25th meeting, Walker presented a model for a steamboat 121 feet long with a beam of 21 feet. The beam is the widest part of a ship. Walker and Cole were chosen as the committee to build the boat. The lumber for the steamboat was cut around the lake by Cole, Davis & Company. Construction began in January of 1849. On January 27th, the Belknap Gazette reported that the work of building the steamboat for the Winnipesaukee Lake has been commenced in good earnest at Lake Village under the direction of Mr. Friend of New York. Mr. F is said to be a gentleman every way competent for the undertaking. The keel of the boat has been laid the present week. The steam engine and machinery are being built in Boston by Mr. Adams. Major Walker, the agent of the company, is on hand and says the boat will most surely be ready to run by the 1st of June next. The new steamboat was launched on May 16th. The launch was a novel event that attracted a large crowd, later estimated in the hundreds or even the thousands, many of whom expected to see a disaster. But the launch was a success. The Laconia Democrat reported, "For some time the men worked away at their screws under the bows, while some pulled upon a rope, till at length she started from her resting place and rode like a gallant sea-bird out upon the water. There were about 100 persons aboard when she left the stocks, among whom were the Lake Village Brass Band, who immediately dedicated her with the tune of 'A Life on the Ocean Wave, a Home on the Raging Deep.' A salute was fired, and loud huzzahs broke the silence of the usually quiet village. We noticed Captain Walker busily engaged in every part of the work, and manifesting great anxiety that everything should be done in order. Everything went off in a grand style, and Captain W. has good reason to feel proud of his craft. The machinery is yet to be put in, and the boat finished up, which may occupy a month or 6 weeks' time." The article on the launch boat does not name the steamboat, but within a few weeks, the newspaper was referring to the Lady of the Lake. Walter Scott had popularized the phrase with his epic romantic poem of that title, published in 1810. In mid-June, the Lady made its first trial run from Lake Village to the Weirs. On the return, the steamboat was reported to have made the 5-mile voyage in 12 minutes, at a rate of less than 2.5 minutes per mile, an impressive speed for those used to the slow horseboats and sailboats that then plied the lake. Tickets for the ladies' maiden voyage on the lake were much sought after, and some 400 passengers enjoyed what has been described as a triumphal journey. The Side-Wheeler steamboat was described in an 1849 news article as a well-built vessel of about 200 tons burthen, 125 feet long, 23 feet breadth of beam, that runs with ease 16 miles per hour. Most historians give the beam as 35 feet, but that dimension may have been altered in later reconstructions of the boat. An 1852 guidebook praised the lady as well-appointed, with a comfortable saloon handsomely furnished, and a convenient promenade deck. She could carry 400 passengers. From its beginnings, the steamboat company had a close relationship with the Boston, Concord, and Montreal Railroad. In their annual report of May 1849, the BC&M Railroad directors pointed out that the steamboat would increase summer travel on their line. The steamboat company requiring assistance for a part of the means of building the steamboat, the directors have deemed it for the interest of the railroad to aim to the extent of $5,000, a substantial contribution to the effort. The steamboat wharf was built on the shoreline next to the Weirs Railroad Station for easy transfers between the two modes of transportation. The railroad and the steamboat advertised together as early as July of 1849. The railroad actually changed the schedules of its trains that summer to accommodate the steamboat schedule, which was coordinated with the arrivals and departures of trains at the Weirs Station. The first summer season was quite successful, the Belknap Gazette reporting in September that the Lady of the Lake is doing a very profitable business, exceeding very much the expectations of its friends and proprietors. This early success prompted the BC&M Railroad to buy the steamboat company, to the great profit of the original builders and investors. The ladies' routes, although varying over time, usually connected the Weirs, Center Harbor, and Wolfeboro. In the ladies' early days, before railroads were built into the western White Mountains, tourists took the steamboat to Center Harbor to transfer to stagecoaches for Conway and beyond. The steamboat also stopped at Bear Island on the 10-mile run between the Weirs and Center Harbor, and at Long Island on the 20-mile run between Center Harbor and Wolfeboro. Long Island Wharf near the center of the lake was a transfer point where travelers could switch to smaller steamboats that served lesser destinations. In the 1870s, the boat stopped at Diamond Island, a popular resort with a large hotel and picnic grounds for excursionists. Typically, the ladies spent the night in Wolfeboro, ready for an early morning run to Center Harbor, and the Weirs to bring travelers to the morning train to Boston. In 1890, the steamboat was making 3 round trips a day, leaving Wolfeboro at 5:30 a.m. and not returning until 7:30 p.m. In some 45 years of service, the Lady never had a drowning or any other fatality, a good record given the thousands of passengers it carried every season, usually a long season that started with ice out in the spring. Still, the Lady had her troubles. At 4 a.m. on the morning of November 13, 1867, the steamboat burned to the water's edge at her wharf in Wolfeboro. The captain and crew barely escaped, losing most of their clothing and valuables in the fire. On one moonlight excursion, the Lady ran onto the rocks at the Witches. The boat had to beach on Governor's Island. Between the repairs and lost business, this accident cost the steamboat company around $10,000. The steamboat was rebuilt and improved several times, so often that it was said that virtually no original parts survived. The most serious overhaul was in 1882, when the boat was pulled ashore at Meredith and rebuilt with an almost new hull. The Lady soon had competition. The Cocheco Railroad reached Alton Bay in 1851. In 1852, that railroad launched its own steamboat, the Dover, which was smaller and slower than the Lady. The Dover was not allowed to stop at the weirs, where the B.C.&M. Railroad controlled the docks, so it called at Meredith instead. Although the Dover was profitable, its owners wished to challenge the Lady. The Dover's hull was cut into 2 amidships and a section added to make it 120 feet long. The boat was renamed the Chocorua, but while comparable in size to the Lady, it remained slower than the older boat. In 1872, the Boston and Maine Railroad, which had taken over the Cocheco Railroad, built the first Mount Washington. The new steamboat, 178 feet long and 49 feet at the beam, was larger and roomier than the Lady. With 450 horsepower, it left the Lady in its wake. So, the Mount Washington took over as the preeminent steamboat on Lake Winnipesaukee. The 2 steamboats, like their parent railroads, were rivals for over 2 decades. But in time, particularly after the Mount Washington acquired docking rights at the weirs, the larger boat won the competition. The Lady began to lose money and finally was retired. The Lady made her last regular voyage from Wolfeboro to the weirs on September 14, 1893. After a final sentimental trip into the Broads on the 19th, the Lady was towed to Lakeport, where her machinery was removed. In 1894, the boat was towed to Glendale, where she served as a boarding house for the workers building Kimball's Castle on the nearby hill. Benjamin A. Kimball, the castle's owner, was president of the Concord and Montreal Railroad, the successor to the B.C.&M. Railroad. After the castle was completed, the old Lady, reduced to little more than her hull, was loaded with stones and towed out into the lake. The plan was to sink her in the deepest part of the lake, but the Lady had the last say. She began listing and taking in water, so the towboat cast off the line and she sank off Glendale. The Lady is still there in 40 to 45 feet of water, often visited by scuba divers. For the less adventurous of us, another memento can be found at the NH Historical Society's Tuck Library, where the Lady's figurehead, a beautiful woman holding an oar, is on display, an elegant reminder of one of the lake region's grandest steamboats.